Hola, everyone. Let's start healing. I'm Adrianne Murchison, and welcome to our first episode of 2020. I hope you've been having a good year so far. Mine has been pretty good, but also I have been under the weather, so I think I sound fairly normal, but if you hear a little something in my voice, I am getting over a sinus infection. Been going a little too hard, and I think God was saying, you need to slow down and sit your behind down. Take it easy a little while. So that's what I've been trying to do over the last several days. But I had to get back to you all and our podcast because I have some great guests in store for you this year, and I'm ready to get it started. You know what we say here. We have more in common than we think, and what we have in common can change the world. I hope you all have already liked us on Facebook and you're following us on Instagram, and know that you can listen to all of our episodes on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and our podcast YouTube channel. This is episode 34 of our Let's Start Healing podcast. This episode is brought to you in part by BE Decor's Interior Decorating and Styling Company, where interior decorator Lynetta Chanel Duncan will creatively personalize and style spaces in your home or office to complement your quality of life. BE Decor's specialty is creating living spaces, including she caves. Chanel Duncan's idea for She Caves comes from her passion for helping women practice self-care. She Caves are offered under the brand She Works, She Slays, She Caves. Visit BE Decors at bedecors.com. You can also find BE Decors on social media at BE Decors. I'm excited about what we are going to bring to you this year. We have some special events planned here in the Metro Atlanta area, and we have some special podcasts planned as well. We'll have a few roundtable conversations that I think you will enjoy on hot topics. Everything pretty much can tie into spirituality and who you really are and how we live our lives, how we navigate this world, whether it's relationships or our jobs, children. And it's just going to be a wonderful year. We are growing and expanding. Today we have Shaheen Bharde, and we talk about so many things related to spirituality, life journey, life, death, family. Shaheen is a neuromuscular and rehab therapist. She's an aromatherapy teacher and presenter. She has been through quite a journey in terms of her own health and wellness. She has come through and survived a cancer diagnosis, and she will share that with you. And it's something we call this episode Wounded Healer, because that is how Shaheen sees herself having gone through the journey that she went through. She is a healer in every sense of the word, and she found herself in need of healing, and that was not a very comfortable feeling. We discussed so many things related to her journey. It's just a beautiful conversation. I know you're going to enjoy it. It touches on things that so many people can relate to, as usual. So let's meet her. Let's get started, and let's start healing. Welcome, Shaheen.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's wonderful to have you here. And there's so many things I would love for you to share with our listeners. You are a true healer by what you do, and also just sharing your life journey.
Thank you. Thank you. That means a lot. Still on the journey.
Yes. And you, I know you have just come through an illness. You're on the other side.
Right.
And you shared on Facebook a little bit about your journey, and I wanted to read a little bit, if that's okay,
Yeah,
for our
sure.
listeners. And you posted this in August.
I did.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Um, well, gosh, I wanted to start in the middle, but I want to start at the beginning,
Go for
actually.
it.
Well, you say, my childhood was spent in the service of my grandparents who were paralyzed by strokes. This heavily influenced my career path and interest in becoming a holistic healer, serving others who had been compromised by disease or injury. Some years ago, my journey led me to work with cancer patients after a dear friend was diagnosed. This role brought me contentment and I felt my best. I saw myself accomplished, managing my own business, being a mother and a wife while also serving my community, while never realizing how thin I was spreading myself. In October, my life took a very unexpected turn when, after routine annual checkups, I was diagnosed with breast cancer myself. My first reaction was, I don't have time for this. I can only focus on my current commitments. This one phone call initiated me through the darkest, toughest detour I had never imagined for myself, though I had confidently gone down with so many others before. Sometimes when you don't make the time for yourself, the universe teaches you otherwise. This was the transformation of me finally having to take care of me. The last few months, I have endured multiple tests, hospital visits, surgeries, complications, more surgeries, life-threatening scares, and thankfully, eventually being able to call myself cancer-free. As I look at the whirlwind the last year has been, I don't have all of the answers and I am not perfect, though I will admit that in the past I have wanted all the answers and to appear perfect to onlookers. Experiencing pain is not a comfortable feeling, and I have tried to avoid it from the fear of seeing my own vulnerable self. This journey takes you through interesting physical pain, through all the intrusive treatments, deep emotional pain when you feel so alone and scared, and overwhelming spiritual pain when you wonder, is it something I did that I'm being punished for? While I tried to run and hide from the experience of pain, it has actually shown me its own miracles by teaching me the power of my faith and inner strength and our capacity to heal when we realize how much love and compassion we are surrounded by. I have come to welcome pain from the past and the present. It is what makes me relate to others and offers a window into others' worlds. Without pain, and if we only existed in the facade of perfection and joy, we lose the ability to empathize and to help others. I am proud to now be a wonderful healer. I watched so many of my patients march through this terrible nightmare with a brave face and determination. Now I feel the whole picture. Through this, they became my strength and gift. Now more than ever, I believe my purpose is to serve others, and my service happens to come in the form of my story. Oh my gosh.
Yep.
That's amazing.
Thank you. And more than a wonderful healer, I prefer to call myself a wounded healer.
Yes, I apologize for saying that because
okay.
I was.
I hope I'm a wonderful healer, but more
you
wounded.
are. And you know what? When I read that the first time, I said wounded healer, and so I just got ahead of myself. So yeah.
It was interesting in my work. There's, some of the teachers that I have follow Carl Jung, and
Yes.
he refers a lot to the wounded healer. And before this entire journey even began, I was always mesmerized by what this is. And I used to think, is it the wounds from like childhood traumas or growing up? And you
wondered
realize
what
is the wound that makes a wounded healer so different to somebody else that goes out to try to help others. And and it's not just one wound, it's ongoing wounds that you accumulate through life, I think, that add to the empathy being a little bit different, that makes you a healer that goes beyond yourself.
Yeah.
You know, looking at the bigger picture rather than you going to work every day and doing what you're doing and coming back.
Yeah.
It's that this when the deeper the scar becomes, I think the more you realize that you want to help just a bit more.
Yeah. And I'm sort of having a revelation as you're saying that, because I believe that we can learn through joy, but that's not the choice that we make. And I think maybe that, as human beings, that is where we find the meaning, in the pain. Everything that you just said, that is where we get the wisdom and the empathy and the deep connections as human beings.
And without knowing what pain is, there's not enough gratitude for the joy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you have joy. Everyone should be in joy, but to appreciate that joy, you have to know what the other side feels like a bit too.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can live this amazing life that's easier and full of joy, and you can absolutely have gratitude, and that's a wonderful place to be. But to grow in that joy, it has to come in forms of knowing what it feels like to be without it a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And no one wants to be in that discomfort.
Yeah.
You know, discomfort is necessary sometimes to understand and be grateful
Exactly.
for what you really have.
Exactly. In fact, I was listening to someone today talk about our souls and how there's something that there may be for us to know that is so simple, but we can't know it intellectually. We have to know it through our soul.
Yes.
And then if we connect with our inner self, then the light bulb goes off.
Yep. Yep. And inner self for me, gosh, I have spent years, you always think you have it down and it changes. And I've realized as I'm getting older that inner self needs some quietness.
Yes.
You live in this life of chaos and everything's moving so fast. We talk about how the days are flying by and you don't get time to quieten the noise inside you. And I think when you go through something like cancer, you go through a trauma, it forces you to quieten yourself down.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when you begin to really listen to yourself.
Is that hard to do given that you're in the middle of pain, like physical pain and treatments and worry? Is it hard to quiet yourself down?
For me, it was. And my personality, and you read that I talk about my grandparents. I was very young when my grandparents were sick and my parents worked very long hours. So I almost feel like I was a caregiver more than I was a child growing up. And my role as a child caregiver was that I would put my emotions aside. So I disassociated and I would physically take care of what I needed to take care of. And I would deal with the emotions later. So when I went through this journey of cancer as a mother of two, I did the same thing. I put all my emotions aside and I physically got through the survival of the treatments.
Oh.
And then later on, the emotional side of it began to slowly hit me. So when it was a time when people were like, oh, you did great, you've healed, you've had the surgeries, you are now cancer free, yay. And so everyone sees that you're physically better and they walk away. You sit there and you're like, oh my God, I just went through cancer.
Oh my gosh.
And I think, so mine was a little bit different. I think I first went through it physically. Then I went through it emotionally. And then I connected the dots spiritually. And so that was my journey. And I think that was just my own survival mechanism going through it. You go through it physically, you're medicated. I was extremely medicated. And someone that does holistic therapy, I didn't even have the energy to think about what do I need to do, as far as pulling my oils together or doing some energy work or doing some massage to get through this. I just wanted to get through this.
Wow.
You're
trying to get rest.
Right. And you don't really rest when you're that medicated.
Wow.
You're
Was
just
there
numb.
any other person in your life who's a healer like you are, who was trying to help you to
get on that, help you in a holistic way?
I do, and I'm extremely thankful. The craziest part of my life that you got to read about was I was always so busy with my life thinking I had to do this for others. I had to do this for others because that's what makes me happy, was that I never took time out to actually have my mammogram.
Mm-hmm.
And I turned 40 and I was convinced I was absolutely fine. We don't have it in our family at all. So I ignored it. And, we're also in a country where healthcare takes a bit of a toll financially. So I was like, why would I put this much money out when I think I'm okay?
Right.
I turned 41 and I did the same thing. I'm like, I don't need to go. I don't need to take this much time out of my life to go through this. I'm absolutely fine. But one day I went for a reflexology class. My teacher, who has guided me for many years, wanted to just have me slow down a bit and do some reflexology. So I went, and during the class or during the session, she said to me, she's like, Shaheen, have you had a mammogram done? And I'm like, no, I don't want to go. I'm fine. And she's like, I think you need to go.
What did she sense?
And at that time, she, being who she is, was so, casual about it. She didn't want to stress me out. And I actually listened to her. I'm like, I probably should go because every time I go for an annual, they're going to keep asking me. And, I went. They called me back for a diagnostic. They called me back for biopsies. And that's actually how they found my breast cancer.
My goodness.
On the same side where she said, just a stagnant, my breast point on that point where she was doing reflexology.
I see.
She said was really stagnant. And the same foot.
No kidding.
And had not sat through that session, I probably would not have had a mammogram today, until today. But she guided me a lot. She slowed me down. She gave me tools that I had by me. If I needed, I could just pull them out, whether it was a gratitude journal, whether it was, some crystals, or whether it was oils. So I had somewhere to go to. But I had to take myself a little bit away from medications to be more aware of myself.
Yeah.
To do it. When I was on medications, it was very hard for me to listen to my own self.
Right. Right.
And that's a journey that I didn't know about until I actually started that on. You don't realize how much you lose yourself.
How long was this whole process of were you diagnosed and then your treatment?
So I was diagnosed at the end of October. I had my first surgery. I had a double mastectomy in December.
A year ago.
Wow. And, went in, rose-tinted glasses. I've got this. I know this. Until 3 weeks after that surgery, I actually got rushed in. I had an infection. And it was extremely severe. And went in, and the doctors rushed me into the operating theater. Had to do surgery ASAP. And that was my pivotal moment. That's when I, probably for the first time in my entire life, kind of faced my own mortality, if that's the way to say it. I remember sitting there thinking, okay, does my husband know where my will is? Does he know where my last wishes are? Are my kids okay? Are they going to be okay? My life for those minutes was everything. And in those moments also, anything that kind of I was holding on to in my life, whether it was maybe people I needed to forgive or things I needed to let go of, I found myself letting go. Because I realized that this could be it. And it's amazing when you have that moment, what you think of.
What did you think of?
And it was my family, for one, but it was forgiveness.
Yeah.
It was forgiveness for myself and for any trauma that had hit me through life that I maybe held on to. It was letting go because there was nothing else at that moment. They were about to put me under within minutes, and that's all I had, not knowing if
you were going to wake up.
Yeah.
Do you remember your mindset when you woke up?
I saw my husband when I woke up, And I know he's been through a lot. And, as someone that does therapy, I realize my caregivers always have it the hardest.
Yeah.
I'm thankful that if it was going to happen to any of us, it was me and not my family.
Yeah.
Because it's so hard. It's so hard to see a caregiver go what they go through. And when I woke up and I saw my husband and the first thing I said was, I love you. It was just nothing but gratitude. It was gratitude.
Wow. And so I'm amazed also how you had a double mastectomy. And what about the emotion around that? It sounds like the emotion didn't hit you until you went back to the surgery with the infection. Did you go through a lot of emotion around that, or?
The emotional part of the journey, whether it was the breast cancer or the treatment of the mastectomy, again, I disassociated because at that moment, the only thing that mattered was making sure my kids understood what I was going through.
Yeah.
Making sure that they, cancer is a word that's so out there.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a 10-year-old, and I had a mentor that told me that I should tell him exactly what I'm going through, tell him that it's cancer. And I thought my 10-year-old would never know, what cancer was. And when I began talking to him, like, this is what I'm going through and this is called cancer, he knew exactly what it was. And I asked him, he's like, Mom, it's on all the commercials, on children's TV. And he asked me 2 questions after I told him. He's like, Mom, are you going to lose all your hair? Because you see on the commercials, it's everyone that goes through chemo. And I was like, baby, I'm not going to have to go through chemotherapy. Fingers crossed. We're hoping for just surgery. And the second question he asked me, he's like, are you going to die? And I was glad that I got to talk him through those. But
what did you tell him?
For me, it was like, we're going to go through this one at a time, and we're going to look at this in a hopeful way. And right now, the doctor said they think the surgery can fix it. And I prepped him and I talked to him from a scientific point of view. Cancer are just bad cells and they just need to come out of my body, and then they're going to put some good ones in. And I try to be, as honest but as easy as possible in explaining it to him.
Yeah.
And he was absolutely okay with it. We talked a lot. We talked a lot about him being a part of my, healing and recovery, and how we're going to see small victories together. And they were extremely positive. I have a 17-year-old too.
Yeah.
And they were fantastic through the, taking the lead in my recovery.
Yeah.
The infection was hard because that wasn't part of the plan. And I saw he began to break a little bit through that process. But we built up again, and I've seen them change so much. This wasn't, there's so much truth to when you say cancer doesn't hit just the patient, it hits the entire family.
Of course.
It has hit all of us, and we've all been broken and rebuilt through this process. It's pretty amazing.
It's quite a year.
Yeah.
Quite a year.
They've matured a lot.
And so can you speak to the pain and some of your experiences and the wisdom of being in those spaces?
When I went through the pain, whether it was physical or emotional, there's not words for it. There's a physical pain that comes and goes and you expect it, but there's an emotional pain it's kind of combined with grief, because you lose a part of your body, like you said, and it hits you that you're amputated. And the way you've been amputated is a part that defines your womanhood, that defines your motherhood, that defines you as a woman. And that emotional pain for me was quite unbearable when it did hit me. I can't sugarcoat it and say, it came and it went.
Sure. It
came and it stayed for a while, and it's a pain that couldn't be explained to anybody else because thankfully people around me have not had to go through that. And it also, what happens is when you have a pain that's different to others, there's an aspect of loneliness that kicks in. And that loneliness has its own pain. And, my faith is strong enough that I don't think I ever said, why me? But it was trying to understand the pain, trying to understand what this pain was trying to teach me. And when you go through it, I think I'm a solution seeker. And what I was trying to do while going through the pain was looking for the whys too much.
Mm-hmm.
What I needed to do was just allow the pain to take its journey in itself.
Right.
To hurt the way it hurt, to let me cry the way it made me cry. And I'm pretty tough in not letting anyone see my vulnerable side.
Mm-hmm.
So when I would get down, those were the times when I needed people around me, but I would avoid people being around me because I didn't want them to see me cry. And I always say
pretty
that,
strong.
well, I think I was stubborn,
Yeah.
not strong.
That's what I meant.
Yeah. And so I don't think that made me strong at all.
I meant like strong-willed.
It made me
Yes.
lonely.
Yeah.
And people will always say to me, like, wow, you've had so many surgeries and complications. And I think my journey was, I think God was trying to break me enough to allow my vulnerable side to be seen more.
Yeah.
When I talk about my journey now, I don't sugarcoat it where I was strong, I got through it. I'm okay with saying I didn't like that part of my pain. It hurt. It hurt me emotionally. It hurt me deep. It hurt me physically. It's very raw even when I think about it now,
Mm-hmm.
because there's no words for that pain. It's just feelings that gush through, and you have a lump in your throat, you feel sick in your stomach, and you're like, I just don't like this feeling. And then slowly you begin to welcome it, because I found gratitude through it.
Mm-hmm.
I found gratitude in places I never thought I would find. I found gratitude in my loneliness because I began to listen to myself more. I never had time to listen to myself before. I'm lucky that I get to work with people of different ages.
Mm-hmm.
I've worked with cancer patients from children all the way to adults. I've worked with stage 1 all the way to end of life care. And I've seen it from outside, and now I see it from the inside, that I found so much gratitude in the hands that were given to me to take care of me.
And so what is your perspective working, and we'll get into the work that you do, working with patients before this, because I have no doubt that you were a caring practitioner of what you do, and a loving practitioner of what you do. What was the difference for you between and what insight do you have now versus before your illness came up?
When I spent years being a therapist, my patients were everything to me. I would be with them. I would support them. I would work with them in any way possible to help them through their chemo or radiation, through their stress, through their, insomnia. And we would work together. And I loved that I could be a listener. I loved that I could be able to give them tools to support their journey. When I went through this, one thing that I never had, that I gained, was finding a way to give somebody permission to feel how they want to feel. That was different for me. Giving somebody permission to feel angry or sad or frustrated is really different when you realize you need that permission also. So when you're with somebody and they feel like that, you don't have to fix that part. They are not breaking through that journey of feeling like that. That's them going through the journey of healing. That's part of the healing.
Yeah.
Not part of the brokenness.
Right. And
So,
you're just being empathetic.
yeah.
You're just standing in
Yeah.
empathy for them.
And I used to think that brokenness was like that, but that's actually part of the healing.
Yeah. So you used to think that had to be fixed. They needed to be comforted.
Yes.
But comforting is just letting them be
right
in their space.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's okay to feel like that because you have to, externalize that to get past it.
Right.
For myself, I was really confused when I would feel broken, that I thought I was being weak. I felt like I needed to be healed, when I didn't realize that brokenness was part of the journey to be healed. So I began to embrace that more. And, you know, talking about the pain, that's when my pain was part of my healing.
Yeah, you know what? I love that. That's insightful for me personally, because I've always been good about, if I'm upset or if I'm hurting, I've always been good about isolating myself.
Yeah.
But it's been a thing of, oh, I have to isolate myself. I mean, I prefer to do that, but
Yeah.
I also, a sense of me feels, oh, I have to do that because I don't have permission to be something else
Right.
around other people.
Right. You have
Because
to be this happy, strong
exactly.
figure
Right.
in front of everybody else.
Yeah.
Or you may come across as weak, and you think that part of you's weak. And I think that's a stigma we have when it comes to
It's
mental
true.
health, where you don't show that side because people will judge that side.
Right.
Yeah.
In whatever way they want to.
Yeah.
Yeah. And something else you said, the other day I had a new insight, and I was wondering if you feel this way. There's one thing to forgive something that happens, like say an illness. And then, like, say there's an illness, right? You had an illness, and then you went through this journey that we're talking about, and here we are. And let's say I had an illness and I went through this journey, and here we are. And so what I've realized the other day that I thought was really helpful for me was to not only forgive the thing that happened, but I call it the way. That space between where I am now and the thing that happened is what I have to forgive.
Yeah.
You know, whatever it is,
Right.
it could be, you know, an act of violence or something that took place on, 5 years ago or something like that. And here I am now. I'm making this up.
Okay.
But if I'm traumatized by that act of violence, if I'm still hurting, but I've forgiven the perpetrator, what I had to do was forgive that space in between, forgive everything that I've felt and I'm struggling, with as a result of that incident.
Right.
So I've called that the way.
I love that.
Do you feel that way?
Yeah, because any trauma changes absolutely everything you decide to do after that. You know, the triggers that come after from the trauma, the experiences, the decisions you make. And so it's not just the one or the set of incidences that cause the trauma. It's every decision you make is the way.
Yeah.
And, if you're abused as a child, whether emotionally or physically, everything you do after that, your decisions are made based on protecting yourself.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Because you don't want to trigger that childhood trauma.
Yes.
And so letting go of that, it's not letting go of the incident, it's letting go of who you became because of it. And that's everything you believe in.
Right.
Because that's what creates you. My disassociation as a child comes because I experienced so much childhood trauma. That was the only way I learned how to survive through life, by emotionally disconnecting from traumas so I could survive.
Traumas as a result of taking care of grandparents
and things that I was exposed to as a child and things that I went through, that the only way I could survive through it was taking away the emotional part of it. And so, when I say that I was going into that operating theater and I had this epiphany to forgive, it was really not even forgiving others, but it was the forgiveness that I needed to liberate myself.
Yeah.
To say, if I'm gonna go, I want to be ready to go. And forgiveness was key for that, for myself more than anything else. Because holding on to stuff does nothing for yourself.
No, it doesn't.
It just builds up.
Yeah, it does.
You have this shell on you.
Yeah.
And I think that's also one of the reasons I'm a good therapist, because I'm able to disassociate from their own, people ask me, like, how do you do end of life care? Isn't it miserable? Isn't it sad? Isn't it heavy? I can disassociate. I can give them my all.
Right.
And not take their trauma on.
Let's talk about the work that you do.
Okay.
So you're a therapist. You do neuromuscular therapy. Is that something that's different from what you just mentioned? Where you're end of life, you might be with someone at the end of their life. And also, you said something else.
I do the essential oil therapy as
right,
well. Yeah.
Essential oils. And are you a caregiver in a sense? Let us know all of what you do.
A bit of an achiever is what I am. I wanted to go into medicine for years growing up. I'm like, I want to be a doctor. And then I came here and I'm like, no, I can't afford to go into this much
and
school.
You came here you're born and raised in London.
I was born and raised in London. I married my husband from South Carolina. And we met in the middle, go figure, and moved to Atlanta. And we had just both finished school. And, we were living this Atlanta dream, and it was fantastic. But it was time to go to work and my major was in medical biology. So I was trying to figure out what to do with my life. And I had this one random car accident made me come across a few neuromuscular therapists. And I was like, this is really cool. I want to do this. I can help.
How long ago was this?
This was about 15 plus years ago. So I went back to school and I did neuromuscular therapy and I began working and I loved it. And I specialized.
What is that? Tell us what that is.
So neuromuscular therapy is, the easy way to say it is medical massage. It's when you're working with the nervous and muscular system to help support ease. It's body work that could be sports therapy. It's a combination of different massage techniques and soft tissue therapy to help work with muscle groups to give ease. I took that and went and specialized more with spinal cord injury patients at the Shepherd Center. I had a friend of mine that asked if I wanted to get certified. I'm like, that would be perfect because I felt life was coming full circle. Both of my grandparents were they had strokes and they suffered as paralyzed individuals.
Amazing.
And as a child, there was only so much I could do. So for me, I got to feel like I can do this now. What I couldn't do for my grandparents, I can do for others.
Right.
So I did spinal cord injury for a while. And when I love my patients, I love my patients. I just had so much passion for my work. But then I wanted to do a bit more. About 7.5 years ago, a really good friend of mine got diagnosed of stage 4 ovarian cancer. It came out of the blue. And I wanted to do more in that field. So I took towards oncology. And I realized there was so many things I could not do with oncology because you can't really go in and do deep work when someone's going through chemo and radiation. And I decided to go because in England, this is part of the healthcare system. I decided to take the aromatherapy route. I wanted to learn how essential oils could bridge this gap where I couldn't help my oncology patients. And I went to a class right here in Sandy Springs, and I took this class and I became mesmerized and inspired in multiple ways. One, I realized I was able to bridge this gap with essential oils.
And tell us what that does, what essential oils do.
It's really going into the chemistry of the oils to understand their chemical functions, to going into the life of the plants or the trees or the resins that you're working with, getting to know them a bit more, because as a person of faith, and this increased my faith, everything created is by purpose. And I'll tell you a beautiful story that really was a aha moment in my classes and in my faith. I'm not, and I'm probably going to make many enemies when I say this, I'm not a fan of lavender.
You know what? I have heard other people say that.
Really?
I really like lavender, but I have absolutely heard other people say that.
I don't know if it's growing up with Yardley lavender soap or what it was. I'm like, I'm not a fan. And my teacher's a huge fan. So she would pass all these lavenders around. I'm like, I don't like it. Then she passes one oil around. I'm like, oh, I like this. This is not lavender. I love this. And she's like, it is. I'm like, there's no way this is lavender. And I asked her, I'm like, what is it about this lavender? It smells so sweet and so different. And And she said to me, she goes, this was grown in the high altitudes in Kashmir, in the Himalayas. And I'm like, oh. And she said, anything grown that experiences the adversity of high altitude, the storms and the winds, is a sweeter smelling flower.
Wow.
And that was a wow moment. I became a believer that looking at how we're using God's creation, exactly how it's grown in nature, is how it helps in our own bodies. And the irony of this lavender, actually, if you look at the chemical breakdown of it, has a higher number of properties that help with pain.
Really?
This plant's gone through its own set of pain, and then it's used in a body to help with its own pain.
Goodness.
And that journey of getting to know,
That's so beautiful.
right?
Yeah.
Getting to know that about that lavender, or getting to know frankincense. You know, as people of faith, frankincense goes back centuries and centuries.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what frankincense is? It's a gum that turns into a resin. It's a gum that forms in a tree when a tree is old and tall and is becoming brittle, that holds the tree in place. So the tree doesn't fall.
Really?
That resin or the gum is taken out and used to keep faith or people in place. Its chemical properties show that it's a skin healer. It connects you spiritually. It helps increase the breathing. It's a bronchodilator, so it increases the lung space, helps you breathe deeper. When you breathe deeper, what happens? You calm down. You ground yourself.
Let me tell you something. Essential oils, and I have a few friends that use essential oils or sell essential oils, and it really goes over my head. And that's very insightful. And so now my question is how to know how to use them, because in some cases, don't you maybe put it on your tongue or something, or sometimes on your skin?
Put it on your
do
tongue.
I have it wrong? Are those other oils, or
you know, it is a natural source. But you have to know that what you're using is also and an essential oil is a very concentrated amount of the real substance. You know, it's distilled. So when you look at, say, an example, an ounce of rose essential oil, if it's completely organic and it's not synthetic, you're talking about a few hundreds of pounds of roses distilled into one small bottle. So imagine how concentrated that is. Putting something like that in your body without knowing what you're doing can be extremely harmful on your liver.
Okay.
So avoid it.
Okay.
Avoid it. And I would really advise someone to talk to someone and get a consultation on someone that's been to school for a very long time and understands exactly what you're doing.
But how do you know whether you put it in a diffuser for a room or you put it on your body?
And again, you know,
is that experimentation?
It could be. It's on your own preference too. You know, putting it in, you can put a couple of drops in a diffuser and it's perfect. I mean, you just use some easy oils, nothing too strong, because please be aware of the fact that animals react to it very differently. You do not want to harm your pets in the house.
Oh.
So talking to somebody that is certified in aromatherapy is really key, because they can tell you, you know what, don't use eucalyptus in your diffuser because it's going to be really harmful to your cats. Knowing that is really important.
Why is
People don't
that?
always know that because it's too strong for them. They react very differently to the human body, and understanding that when you're pregnant, you don't want to use certain oils because you react differently. You're in a different place to someone that's not pregnant, or children.
Yeah.
You always want to use low doses of some that you don't want to use. So even though they're natural, they can be irritable or they could be harmful. And so you want to make sure what you're using is right, in its quantities and its sources, and you want to make sure it's not synthetic as well. So that's a whole
I got you so off topic, like I've been doing, but we'll come back. I have one more question.
Certified. Yeah, absolutely.
About this. So something like the lavender from the Himalayas. What Okay, so I want some of that. How do you know what is that? What do you look for when you want that?
Something like that.
Yeah. What do you say to someone, "Hey, I want that. Can you go in Whole Foods and get something like that?" What?
There's a whole, essential oil has become such a big fad now. You can go to Amazon, you can find it. You can go to Whole Foods, you can find it.
Yeah.
Now that being certified and going through many, many hours in this country and studying in England for many hours on this topic, will always say, just find yourself an aromatherapist who's certified and go through them, because they know sources that, when I order my oils from my clients and patients, I talk to my suppliers to find out when they harvested, where they harvested, because oils have an expiration date too. That's really important to know.
Oh.
And not just that, there's some companies that do something called a gas chromatography. That is basically looking at all the chemical components, making sure you have the most organic product, making sure it's not synthetic, and making sure that the functional groups in there are to benefit of you, of what you're going through. So aromatherapists purposefully will know something like that. So I would always say, just find yourself an aromatherapist.
So therapists, they're a therapist. You're a therapist in aromatherapy, just like you might be a therapist in massage.
Absolutely.
So,
and they're out there.
Okay.
And you will find people that are certified. And, in Europe, to become an aromatherapist, you have to do hundreds and hundreds of hours of classes to be able to qualify, because it's part of the healthcare system over there. Here it's not regulated, but they have to go through chemistry. They have to go through physiology. It's taken as seriously. So just to know that you need to take it that seriously.
Yeah. I think
to treat it safely on your body.
You're really presenting some knowledge and awareness. I think it's really helpful because I don't know. I think I walk around here not knowing.
Yeah. And safety is with everything, you know, and it can be amazing, but anything taken to its extreme can be harmful.
Yeah. So I got us way off track because
that's okay.
You were talking about this in your work.
Yes.
And
this was the journey, going through essential oils. And then after that, I began traveling to a cancer hospital once a year in England. I had a teacher that would come from Provence to London and teach me more. And she began, teaching us and specializing us in end-of-life care and working with ailments as far as pain and sleep and respiratory issues, with people that have cancer. And that just took me down that road. Mm-hmm. I experienced end-of-life care, whether it's personally or with friends. But this really helped me. It's a part in my life, I realize sometimes even in this country, where I wish we could nurture our people more at the end of life.
Yeah.
And I got to do that. I'm really blessed I got to do that with my grandparents.
Yeah.
I got to be with them till the end of days. Mm-hmm. And knowing that when you're in family systems that get to be around their loved ones at the end of life, I think about those that don't have family around them at the end of life. They don't need to be numbed with medications if they can handle it at the end of life, but they need to be loved and honored.
Yeah.
And their loved ones need to find closure.
Yes.
With that much love and honor, because sometimes what they see at the end can be really traumatic if it's not done right.
Yes. Yes.
And whether it was blending for the patient and the daughter to have a blend where she could use the oil afterwards to trigger happiness rather than think of the pain her mother went through during her cancer.
That's beautiful.
Finding ways to kind of give the love they deserve. Mm-hmm. I sometimes think that at the end of life, you're kind of left to die.
Yeah. If
not done right. And coming from a place where we honored and we took care of our grandparents till the last breath, I doesn't feel right to see that with anybody else.
Yeah. And some cultures, they bathe the body. I've heard some people say, how they may have bathed their mother, or grandparent after, which is sort of a tradition.
In my faith, it's a tradition to bathe at the after death, before the burial.
Yeah.
And it's just a way of honoring that they should go in their best.
Yeah.
And, it's not just a physical cleanse, it's a spiritual and an emotional cleanse too, in an honor.
Yeah.
So, and it's taking time out as well before you put that person to rest, right?
And so that's a part of the work that you do, that you're with people sometimes before.
Yeah. Yeah. And, there's a quote in my faith tradition, and I'm Muslim, and it says, with hardship comes ease. And I try to be the ease in others' hardships. And so I think that has just taken me to places that it doesn't have to be, finding ease after the hardship or after the pain. It can be during as well.
Is there an experience that you could share that was especially moving for you?
For work, yeah, there was when I did my end of life certification. Ironically, right after that, I went up to the north of England. I was in England doing my certification. My grandma was passing. It was very ironic that literally 3 or 4 days later, I ended up being there when my grandma passed.
Oh.
And that was kind of heavy on me because everything was really close to home. And I came back and I was given, I had a patient that was asked to be seen. And she was at that time an 18-year-old that was given 1 year to live. And she was a beautiful soul. She had bone cancer. And it was one of those that I was told, just be with her and give her ease. And we worked together. We worked through oils, but we worked through feelings and thoughts and emotions that I think the oils also brought out. There are oils that I've seen that I've worked with people that kind of let them express and let them talk. And we just began talking a lot, and I just began watching her slowly be okay and slowly accept. It went through, the beginning was very like, but why? But something's, what's going to happen to me after? What's the afterlife going to be like? To just complete acceptance.
Yeah.
And it was hard for me not to be there for her, unfortunately, right at the end, because it was just a few days after my own surgery. And so I have a slight regret that I wasn't able to be there at the end, but I look back at it and I look at the journey towards the end to see where we went from fear to acceptance.
Yeah.
And I think when the patient accepts too, I see the family also let go.
Yeah.
And I see the other way around too. When the family doesn't let go, when the family does let go, is when the patient lets go.
Yeah.
I've seen patients hold on until their family are okay with them going.
Oh, no question. You're making me
beautiful.
want to cry, because I've had, there's so many, not, you're talking about, work and personal.
Yeah.
And I've had some experiences strictly personal, just in being around family members who've passed away. And even when you were talking a moment ago, I was thinking about years ago, maybe about 30 years ago, my now late brother had a girlfriend who had cancer. And I remember when I met her, they lived in Virginia, and he had told me that she had cancer and she looked normal, and it just couldn't really resonate. Like, I hear what you're saying, but it's not digesting because she looks fine.
Right.
And so I was living in Atlanta, and I come back to Atlanta, and as time goes on, she starts becoming more and more ill.
Yeah.
And she would spend a lot of time over at my mother's house. And my mother might say, oh, her name was Stephanie. And my mother say, oh, she's in the den, just resting on the couch. And I just thought it was just so beautiful that she also had her own family, her parents and sister, but she had this other place that she could go to. And my brother was not afraid. He also always wanted to be a doctor. So he was not fearful about being close to her. Yeah. And he was with her when she passed. And I just thought that must have been just so beautiful for her to be, around so much love, and what a blessing it is for both parties, when you're with someone at the end of their life. And I've had different situations, like him, my brother, my grandmother, my mother, all three different situations where I was with them at the end of their lives. And he wasn't conscious when he passed. And then my grandmother just was in the hospital and just suddenly crashed. My mom, that was something where it was a lot of love. Like you said, a family friend said, you know, she's holding on for you. And I said, are you holding on for me? And she said, oh, yeah. This was months before she passed.
Wow.
And so I wasn't about to try to let her go.
Right.
I just wasn't.
Right.
And then eventually I started accepting. I said, you know, I'll be okay. Doesn't mean I want you to go or go
it's
tomorrow.
a hard thing to do.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. And when she passed, we were going to sleep. She was in my room. We had brought a hospital bed into my room, and I was in my bed and she was in her bed. And we didn't know she was going to pass. We were like about to go to sleep. She and I were about to go to sleep. And I was saying goodnight to her. I was so exhausted. If I wasn't so exhausted, I would have slept with her in the hospital bed. But I was so tired, I didn't want to fall asleep and then have to roll over to my bed. So, but when I went to hug her and kiss her goodnight, she had cupped my face and just looked at me with like the greatest love. The greatest love, you know?
She knew.
Yeah. And then about 15 minutes later, she made this noise. And then I jump up and that's when everything happened.
Yeah.
And so it was just, I'm saying this to say I've been through 3 different experiences, and you don't even have to be conscious.
Yeah.
Like my brother wasn't conscious in the sense that we are conscious right now, but I believe that they know that it makes a difference to have that love, that surrounding love. Like it's a huge blessing. I wouldn't take... The biggest blessing for me of my life was caring for my mother in her last days, her last year.
Right.
It's
also the hardest thing you probably ever did.
Oh, of course.
Right? And it's interesting that the biggest blessing was probably your biggest trial.
Yes.
Because you didn't want to let go and you knew what was happening.
Yes.
And I see that a lot it's the hardest thing to do, but it's also the most profound thing you'll ever do.
It is. I think about that often. It's so funny you're in this line of work because I think about it often, just the blessing of being with someone at the end of their life.
Right.
You think you're giving them a gift, which you are, but they're giving you a gift.
Absolutely. And I think one thing maybe we don't do enough, and I'll say it as a therapist, as a human, as a person of faith, that we don't talk about death enough.
No, I agree 1,000%.
And that's where fear comes from.
Yes.
And, before I was diagnosed, I would always tell my husband, I'm like, when I die, I want this and this and this. And he's like, stop it.
Yes.
And this was before I even suspected anything was wrong with me. Because of my line of work, I became comfortable with it. But I realized how uncomfortable people were with talking about it. And I feel like we would do so much better with being around people at the end of life if we talked about it more. Yeah. Because it's the one thing that's guaranteed for all of us.
Yeah. Well, I think we're so afraid of death. You know, I think it's just so subconscious.
Right. And when you get to be around death more and you see this unusual acceptance that comes, with those that are passing, I think when I was going, my last thoughts when I was going for that second surgery, when I had the infection, I was going in and I was hearing all these words that were thrown out, and I think they didn't realize that I understood what these words meant. And so, there was a fear there, but it was also it's okay. I've done the best I can till now. I did my best. I raised my kids the best. I gave and I served my friends, my family, my patients, my community the best I could. I'm okay. Yeah. If this is it, that's okay. And I think that's a life journey we all need to do. Is you don't wait to be at that point, because nothing is guaranteed. No. You do it now so you can be okay with it. Yeah. And you realize what life is about. Yeah. And it's not about, like, you had to slow down. Like, you're living a more calm life now, I would imagine. Kind of. I need to learn. I need to practice what I teach, but much calmer. Much calmer. I'm beginning to listen to myself a lot more. You know, if I, I'm passionate about helping others. I'm passionate about community work. Absolutely passionate. But I also realize that if I'm going to spend one day being that passionate with giving, then I'm going to spend one day giving to myself. Because I can't do anything if I'm not taking care of myself.
Well, so what is your spiritual practice? And you mentioned that your faith is Muslim.
Yep.
So what was your spiritual practice growing up, and what is it now?
So I was born Muslim. Both of my parents are Muslim. I grew up, in a traditional home. My parents, my grandparents, my grandfather would pray. I would watch him, and then I began praying. I learned the Quran, which, children of the Islamic faith do. I went through a phase when my grandfather passed where I began praying. And then I went to college and slowed down a little bit, as it does. And I went through just a normal British girl growing up journey. And I didn't go to a mosque, which is the place of worship, as much. I came here and got married. Again, I was the same. I was, more Muslim by name than actually kind of worship and kind of practicing. Until the irony, I got pregnant in 2001. And what else happened in 2001? 9/11 happened. And I was carrying a baby in my stomach, and I'm hearing all this news. Muslims are this, Muslims are that, Muslims are this. And for me, it was, well, I may not have practiced enough to know all the quotes that make my faith peaceful, but I know it's not like this. And that's when I began changing my way of learning and getting closer and picking up, I could not raise my child in a country where people were going to look at him in a way that he would be looked at as somebody that, was anything more than a peaceful person.
Yeah.
And that's actually the journey that took me into connecting with a mosque that I did in Roswell, and I didn't know what else to give, so I became a volunteer coordinator for a Sunday school program. And
really?
I was like,
I didn't know what else to do.
I'm like, I'm not that knowledgeable to give more. And then slowly I got I got nominated for the board, and I was like, wow, they want me on the board. I'm a young woman from England, and you have this like old man are supposed to be on the boards of faith organizations, and they want me. But it actually gave me an opportunity to use that to do something bigger. And my faith journey took me closer to my faith, but also helped me use that to build interfaith bridges. And I got to work with other organizations. There's one called the Islamic Speakers Bureau that taught me how to become a public speaker and go out and speak and educate, and whether it was schools or law enforcement or organizations or hospitals, and to show who this faith is. And by doing this teaching, we know that they say when you teach, you learn.
That's huge.
More. And every time I got to go out, I was learning a little bit more. What
would you learn?
I was learning more about myself more than anything else. People would ask questions, and this was the perfect platform because you're watching something on media that says, Muslim women are oppressed and they look like this and they never get to talk or go out. And here's me going out and, educating people on what it really meant for me. You know, if I was oppressed, would I be a board member of a mosque? If I was oppressed, would I be a leader in my community? If I was oppressed, would I be here right now? And it was empowering for me to watch people learn, understand, love, and become more compassionate, become more inclusive. And watching people that, I actually stood in a church once. First I sat. There was a group that wanted to teach Islam 101. And this Islam 101, and I'm not going to mention this one church, it's never, ever, ever happened anywhere else. They taught about how bad the faith was. And how it was a faith of hatred and terrorism.
Really?
And it was open to the public, so I turned up. And my husband thought I was crazy. And I'm like, no, but I can't not go.
Well, so what was the description of Islam 101? I mean,
it's like, this is Islam, and what can we do to bring them to the light, per se. It was,
Bring the truth of
Yes.
these. Oh my!
How can we convert them or change them?
Oh, okay.
Enlighten them. What it was. And
So turn someone who's Muslim into a Christian
of that specific sect. Yes. So I sat at the back, and I don't cover, so I don't look obviously like a Muslim. I just look like a random, Indian ethnic woman with a British accent sitting at the back. And I listened through all of it, and I went with somebody else, and we sat through it. And at the end, I introduced myself, and it was a bit of a shocker to the crowd, but it was really interesting. And I had some that were a little bit bitter.
What did you say?
I just want to introduce myself. My name is Shaheen Bharde, and I'm the public relations director at the mosque in this location. And if you'd like to know my version of my faith, then I would love to have you at the mosque and show you around. And I'm not going to lie, I was nervous.
Sure.
And you don't know how this is going to go. And then afterwards, it was really interesting. I got a lot of people that, not a lot, a few people, a handful that came up to me and introduced themselves. And they're like, wow, we can't believe you sat through that. I'm so sorry.
Oh, my.
But what it was an opportunity to say, there's a different side to this. And if you want to know who I am, if you want to humanize anybody and learn anybody, you get to know them. And that was my part.
That's what it's all about. That's what it's all about.
We just fear the unknown.
Yeah.
That's all it is.
How many people were in the room? Was it like 50 people, 100 people?
There was about 150 people in that room.
Really?
Yeah. And
here in the metro Atlanta area.
Honestly, I'll give it to Atlanta, I'll give it to our city, and I'll give it to Roswell and these areas that we have built some amazing interfaith bonds.
Yeah.
We've done big strides here because we have amazing, amazing people, and we're in the city of Martin Luther King.
Yeah.
That has worked for civil rights, and that has not passed us. And so this was just one out of many, many. This has never happened anywhere else. And
and I, one of the things that inspired me to want to do this podcast, one is I'm a part of a few different spiritual discussion groups that brings together people of all different faiths.
Yeah.
But the other thing is, after the 2016 presidential election, and I did a story on a discussion group on race called Healing the Racial Divide. And people were so bothered by the divisiveness of the election that they wanted to come together with all different ethnicities and talk. I may not understand you, but I know I don't like this divisiveness.
Right.
And so what I found in doing a story on this group was that there are several other groups.
Right.
This was a community group. This was born out of a community.
Yeah.
There are other groups at churches. They don't even have a person of color in the group, but they want to learn.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that is telling me that although we see through the media, we see this extremism, but it's not necessarily that way. There are people who are like the people who came up to you and said, I'm so sorry. And they would like to come and learn more and have a greater awareness.
And that's it's ironic that we've come to this point on talking about this, because we started with my personal trauma, my personal chaos, and finding the calm through it. This is exactly that on a larger scale. And this is why I went into interfaith after becoming a therapist, was that we have collective trauma. We have collective chaos.
Yes.
We have to find the calm through it. And that calm is coming together. That is the scars of mastectomy. What do you do with that scar? Do you sit and cry about it? Or do you find your empowerment through it? And this calm that you talk about, or this togetherness and this movement of people to stop the divisiveness, is exactly that. It's finding how do the scars empower you?
Right.
Right? How do they make you?
Right.
And that's the solution seeker in us.
Right.
We have to find the calm through the chaos. And that is by being together through it.
Exactly.
And, all of this divisiveness has been intense and insane, but look what's coming out of it. People are bundling together.
It's true.
Look at the elections after that. So many more women came into leadership. So many more, races and religions took part in becoming a voice in their communities, whether as Congress people or senators or mayors. People are stepping up.
Right.
And the chaos was horrible and painful, but the result will only, I think, bring us closer.
Exactly.
Had it not been the unfortunate of people saying bad things about other faiths or colors, other people would not have stepped up to hold on to them.
Right.
The Tree of Life synagogue shooting that happened last year. What happened after that? People stepped up and reached out to the Jewish communities, and they told them they were there for them in a time where people spew anti-Semitism all the time, and you hear the hateful. But when something like this happens, only more people come up and hold your hand.
Exactly.
Right?
Right.
So we just have to be louder than the hate. And I think that's the calm you find through the chaos.
That's so true.
So it's true. You get the individual healing, but that communal, that generational healing is so much more important. The way that we all need to step up in this state and look at the chaos that goes on and how people of other colors are not being taken care of enough.
It's so funny you said generational healing, because I really believe that younger generations don't have hate to the extreme that we see it. So I really think that even what we're talking about aside, that the younger generations are so different. When they really, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, when they're really in power, I think the world's just going to be amazing.
I love that. And I know that people look down at millennials, and I have a 17-year-old son, but I can tell you that he, social media can do many good things. It can do many bad things. But one of the good things it has done has really enlightened the younger generation of what's really going on.
Right.
And I think that will really empower them to do better things, whether it's climate change and I think it will really help to stop generational trauma.
Yeah.
Because they're more aware of it.
I hope so.
It can be ended if it can be healed.
Before we close, I have 10 more questions. No, I'm kidding.
Go for it.
Just 5. Well, we talked about, before we came on, we talked offline about Sedona. It came up and you mentioned, because that is a dream destination for me, and you mentioned being there and being in the vortex. And if you could just share briefly what you mean by that, and you were able to let go to really experience a certain kind of energy.
It's funny because, when people kept telling me, go to Sedona, there's all these energy vortexes everywhere, go find them. So, you go to this thing, you're always looking for the next destination, right? And
right.
I went to Sedona, and I went with my husband, who thought I was absolutely nuts. We need to find these vortexes because it's going to make us feel like this and like that. And, we found these spots, and we would stand there, we're like, I don't feel anything. I don't, nothing's changing. And my husband's like, this is just ridiculous. What is wrong with you? And, it was literally searching for something to fix us is what I was doing. And then we eventually let go because he's like, I'm over this. Let's just go hike to the top of, Bell Rock. And we went up to pretty close to the top, and we sat there. And I just remember this gush of feeling of, it's so hard to describe. It was like acceptance, letting go, grounding. And I realized it wasn't about searching for that destination to find happiness or acceptance. It was being in the moment. When I stopped searching, we found it. And I probably wasn't sitting on a vortex, but Sedona is known because of, the red rocks and the iron and the grounding that it gives you. But there was a really strong sense of spiritual awakening. I don't know if that's the right word. And, coming from the Muslim faith, it's one of the Abrahamic faiths. And it actually got me thinking about, if you look at stories of the Bible, or the Quran, or the Torah, you will see that prophets would go seclude themselves in mountains.
Right.
And you wonder why. Yeah, I mean, maybe when you're reading it, you don't wonder why. But when you're sitting on a mountain, you kind of figure out why. That seclusion of being away, or being in the mountains, away from every noise that is not natural, is almost that time that allows you to think much, much deeper than any other time. And it makes sense. Why do they seclude themselves for days or weeks in mountains and caves away from everything? So they could hear themselves.
Yes.
And when you go that deep, sometimes you hear something more than yourself. Maybe you hear something divine. And, I felt like that with my own surgeries. When I was quiet enough, I felt I could hear not divine, but maybe signs of divine, where I was getting the lessons of my pain. I was getting lessons of my gratitude. And that's kind of what the mountain was like for me. It was that Sedona experience that helped me realize that seclusion, isolation was necessary once in a while to really go deep within yourself.
Yeah, to really get to that awareness.
Yeah.
You had a new experience of awareness and a connection.
Of solitude.
Yeah.
Solitude is not a bad thing.
Yeah.
It's not loneliness.
Oh, no.
At all. Right? Solitude is necessary, because if we don't know ourselves enough, we're not content with ourselves enough, we're not at peace with ourselves enough, we're never going to find it outside.
Yeah. Maybe that's why we're so many of us, I know I am, are so captivated with the ocean, because it's pulling on a divine part of ourselves.
Yeah. And that sound is the first sound you have. You're in utero. The sound of water.
Right.
Takes you back a bit, right?
Right.
And so there's nothing more calming than the calmest place,
true.
hopefully, that you were in utero.
That's true. That's true. I often bring up on this podcast about being, here we're near the North Georgia mountains, and I've been there many times. But when I was there earlier this year, I was at a place where I was just so startled by this particular location of the stillness.
Yeah.
You're in a rush to get there, and then you get there, and then all of a sudden, I'm like, why? What's that noise? There's no noise. Yeah. It's just total stillness, total quiet.
Yeah.
And it really, it was such a reminder of how that's what's inside of us, and we put these layers on top of it.
Yeah.
And I thought about that when you were talking earlier. It just seemed like, you were able through your experience to just sort of remove the layers within inside.
I think we need to. One of those layers is also ego. One of those layers is also trying to keep up with this life that people portray to be the perfect life, or having to work busy, live busy. If you're not busy, you're not productive.
Right.
That's the kind of life that's set up for us here. And I love that you said that, because trees have so much to teach us. Okay. I mean, and we're so blessed to be in Georgia, where you have some of the most beautiful trees. And one of my most, favorite places to go to, especially when I'm working heavy emotional work, is the Roswell Mill, which is really close to my home.
Yes, absolutely.
And I have a little stone that I'll sit on, and I look around, and there's one tree that I could write about for hours. By this one tree, because I feel like it talks to me. It's so weird.
Yeah.
But it's a tree that's really, really tall. I can't imagine how many feet tall it is. And it stands extremely straight. It's not bending at all. It's not swaying at all. It's very straight. Has roots that come almost underneath the rock that I sit on. But the tree in the middle is completely damaged and broken. Completely damaged. It's got a big fat hole in it. It's just like shed.
Yeah.
But the tree hasn't swayed. It still stands tall. It still reaches up. So the damage, the brokenness of that tree didn't stop it from growing high and reaching the sky.
Right.
because the roots were deep enough too.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think if we took ourselves away from our like metal boxes, our stone boxes, and kind of got the lessons from nature, I think we would be so much more content human beings.
I think you're absolutely right. Absolutely right. I get so fascinated where I've only seen pictures. I don't remember actually seeing this in person or live, I should say. But when trees are like really huge and then sometimes they grow together and they grow into one
Right.
up
Beautiful.
top, that's like amazing to me.
And that's something you see. How about the roots that intertwine underneath?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, the lessons that nature could teach us, hence the oils.
I was
that
about
come
to
through
say,
it,
that's what you,
right?
that's my lesson for today
And
with the oils.
Frankincense, you know, that is one, ironically, that one oil resin, however it was used centuries and centuries ago, that so many different faiths use to find spiritual healing. How do they all know?
Right.
But there's wisdom to nature. I don't know, there's so much to learn. I think healing, individual, communal, national, global, can all happen if we just take time out enough.
Absolutely.
Just to see what's around us.
Absolutely. Well, I have these few healing questions I like to ask guests. And the first one is, how would you describe your knowing or your perception of God?
Ooh. How would I know? I believe and I know and I perceive God because everything that's around me. Whether it's knowing that a baby cannot just by chance be in a uterus for 9 months and come out just like that without any divine intervention, without knowing that trees and flowers and people can live just like that without divine intervention. I feel like everything that happens has its own divine intervention. It doesn't have to be looking up into the sky to find God, because I really think it's all around us.
Yeah.
And I think that's where my belief comes from, is by looking around me. You know, when I was looking for God during my worst times through my, through my cancer journey, I found it in the people around me. I found it in my surgeons and my nurses and my family and my husband and my parents. That was my belief in God, that with my hardship, he gave me ease. And that was, I feel like divine intervention is everywhere. I feel like we just don't look close enough to find it.
Right, right. That's beautiful.
Thank you.
Beautiful. Now, these days, when do you most feel the presence of God?
Whenever I look for it, I find it. And whenever I quieten myself, like we talked about before, you know, I am not going to lie that in the chaos, I lose myself. And I feel like maybe in the chaos, I lose myself because I'm not looking enough to find what's out there.
Sure.
I find the presence of God in my solitude, in my quietness, but I also look at my blessings. In my gratitude, I find God. In my blessings, I find God. I think. You know, I know every mother says this, but I'm one of the luckiest people in the world because of my 2 sons.
Sure.
And the gratitude of that is really my closeness to God, where I find God.
Yeah. Well, I personally think that, you know, mothers are that relationship with our mothers. And I love both my parents passed, and I love my father, you know, extremely.
Yeah.
I think that the relationship with the mother and the child is the closest thing to God.
Absolutely.
It's just something in me feels that. What do you think God calls you to do for yourself and others through your work?
Serve. You know, when you say, where do you find God or where is God? or why is he not with me? You know, some people say, why is he not? Why did he give me this disease? If he's there, he should have. He is there, and it's through the service of others and my job and my people around me. Service is how God takes care of you. And it's
that's
been my
powerful.
lifelong work.
Service is how God takes care of you.
Yeah.
Serving others is
You
how
know,
God takes care of you.
When I got diagnosed, it was really interesting. And, you know, I would get these random messages from friends I hadn't heard from a long time. They're like, something tells me I need to, you know, check in with you. Are you okay? And I would kind of get thrown off because at that time I decided not to tell anybody about my diagnosis. It was a lot to take in. And I asked my imam, who's the, you know, the resident scholar, the faith scholar at my mosque. I was like, you know, this really weird thing keeps happening to me. And I get these messages from people that I haven't heard from a while, checking in with me. Like, it's almost like they know something.
Yeah.
And he said something to me, and he was a really dear friend through my journey, you know, and really guided me through. And he said, maybe you asked for something, and he's answering it through these people. It's almost like prayer is you talking to God, and intuition is God talking to you. And through these people, there's something about them that will help your journey. So maybe take it. Maybe take it and share it. And maybe there's a prayer that they can say that's meant for you. Or maybe there's a physical help that's meant for you.
Yeah.
And so that's the service. You know, there's answers in your prayers through things around you or people around you. And that's what we're called for.
Yeah. Yep. Beautiful.
Thank you.
Tell me about a time when you had, and I know there's many, a blessing or a miracle, and you said, God totally did this. I had nothing to do with it.
Oh, giving birth. Having children. That wasn't me. They're my two miracles. That's not me. And you know, they've done a pretty good job being pretty awesome people.
You say, where did they come from?
Where did they come from?
And they're 10 and 17,
they're 10
two
and
boys.
17. And they came from God. They did not come from me.
Does your husband say that too?
No. We're on two pretty spiritual levels. Whenever they do something great, he's like, that is me. I'm like, okay, we'll talk about that later.
So would you say that you are both a healer and a seeker, or are you more one or the other?
You know I call myself the wounded healer because I love Carl Jung. But I'm a seeker. And I think that's why, you know, when you talk to me and you realize I'm doing 100 things at once, I think that's me seeking. And I think as I seek, there's a journey of healing that comes in it.
Yeah.
But healing isn't the journey. I think the healing comes from the seeking. It's a result of the seeking. And I think I'm always going to be a seeker. And I think every journey, maybe cancer was just this recent, you know, wound. But I know there'll be many wounds that will come in my life.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of me seeking.
Have you thought about writing a book?
Oh, gosh.
Does everybody ask you that? Because, like, you have a book to write.
You're so sweet. People have told me to write. And I'm not going to lie. I, you know, never realized growing up that I had dyslexia, and I used to do good in school, and then I used to do so bad in my exams, and it kind of pushed me away from reading for that reason. So when you say books, it kind of triggers some like anxiety in me. I would like to. I don't know. I feel like let's see. Let's see.
Do you do you journal?
I do journal, and I've slowly started putting it out there. I hit my 1 year mark when I got diagnosed.
Yeah.
And I went through this day where I was like, oh, it's going to feel like a huge achievement. And it's my, you know, cancerversary.
Yeah.
That day came along, and it wasn't like that. I'm not going to lie. I was really sad. I began to replay a lot of the feelings and thoughts and fears and pains that came up last year. And I couldn't process what was happening. So I decided that evening that I was going to write about it. And I try to be honest and raw, because sometimes you see a lot of blogs that inspire and tell you how you got through it, but they don't talk about how hard it was when you were getting through it. And I've tried to do that for others, but also for my kids to know that the journey wasn't easy, even though the victory is obvious. So that they can realize sometimes the journeys are not supposed to be sugar-coated or look pretty.
Right.
Even though afterwards you'll remember it as a victory. Yeah. But it takes a road to get there.
It does.
So I've started blogging, but I need a lot of autocorrecting and grammar.
Well, you have you have your story, and then also within that, and even separate from that, a lot of wisdom that is so clear. You say it in such a clear, beautiful way.
Thank you.
So, you have a book to write.
Thank you so much. One day. Thank you. I appreciate it. That means a lot to even have you say that to me.
Well, thank you so much for doing
this.
Thank you.
This means a lot.
At the start of our podcast, I mispronounced Shaheen's last name. It's Bharde. Shaheen Bharde is the way that it's pronounced. Shaheen is spelled Shaheen, and Bharde is spelled Bharde. You can email Shaheen at shifablends@gmail.com. That's SHIFABLENDS@gmail.com. Remember that you can listen to all of our podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and our podcast YouTube channel. Also, remember to follow us on Instagram and like us on Facebook. Until next time, let's start healing.